Hi, this is the 5th video in this short series on anxiety disorders and obsessive compulsive disorders. So in the previous video we talked about how obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder in a way, that the core of it is anxiety. And one of the ways that you can see that manifest is if you were to try to stop a person from carrying out their compulsion. So remember we talked about locking the door at night. In order to sleep, you need to go check so that you can feel calm. If you were prevented from going and checking, you would remain anxious, right? So you can see where the anxiety here is at the core of the disorder. I want to talk about something else here as well. The DSM talks about insight for OCD. And this is a specifier. In other words, the DSM asks you to specify one of these, of the following three about insight. Is it good or fair insight, poor insight, or absent insight, meaning delusional? So when we say insight, it means that the person recognizes that what is going on for them, that is not true or not realistic. So, for example, with OCD, and by the way, typically with OCD, there is good or fair insight, which is probably why the DSM wants you to specify, because when there's not, it's unusual. Typically, people will maybe show up for therapy and say, I'm really struggling because I have to wash my hands, 150 times a day, and if I do it 151, I have to start all over, my hands are bleeding, and this doesn't make sense. I don't think it's a good idea to wash your hands that many times. I know in a way that there's no way that my hands are that germy or dirty, but I also can't help it. That would be good insight. The person knows that it's not realistic. It's bothering them, it's not a good idea, and it's not realistic that their hands are that dirty. However, they can't stop. It's still a disorder. It's still a problem, right? With poor insight, that person who might be washing their hands 100 times a day might tell you that, in between, as soon as I stop washing my hands, the germs just flood my hands and I could get sick or get the people that I love sick. Or, there's a with absent insight or delusional beliefs, let's take a different example. So I have an intrusive thought, an obsession that, somebody I love is going to die. And it's a fear, right? It's an anxiety-ridden fear that somebody I love is going to die. So with good or fair insight, I realize that that's really not likely. Someday, yeah, but it's not likely that that's going to happen anytime soon. With poor insight, I think it's probably likely that this will happen soon, and I'm afraid, and I think it's probably true. With absent insight or delusional beliefs, I might think that they have already died because I had that thought. So as soon as I have the thought, that's an indication that they really have died. So that would be delusional, which is, out of touch with reality. That is more on the psychotic realm. So this is an opportunity, and I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about insight in general. So when we talk about insight in psychotherapy, often we're talking about ego-dystonic and ego-syntonic. Dystonic is D-Y-S-T-O-N-I-C, and syntonic is S-Y-N-T-O-N-I-C. So ego-dystonic and ego-syntonic have to do with insight and have to do with how much of a problem something seems to me. So let's say I'm working with somebody who has anorexia nervosa, and she weighs, 100 pounds, and she's 5'10" or something. And I see her as being underweight and at risk, and that her life is diminished by her by this disorder, and her health is at risk. If she has good insight, she might come for treatment. She might say, I have this problem. I feel fat, but I know that I'm wrong. I know that I'm not. I see that the scale says 100 pounds. I look in the mirror. I think I see somebody who's fat, but I also know that I'm not. That's pretty good insight, especially for anorexia, because it's a tough one. With poor insight, she thinks that she's, still needs to lose some weight, that she's fat, and yeah. With absent or delusional beliefs, she might feel that she's obese, that she absolutely has to lose weight, and there might be some additional things like certain foods might have special powers. Another more common example, though, and this one is more typical. Sometimes people come in seeking therapy, and maybe they're depressed. And when somebody's depressed, they often feel pretty worthless, like we saw in some other videos. And when somebody feels worthless, they might tell me that they are worthless. I'm a worthless piece of crap. I'm a terrible person. That is ego-syntonic. They believe that. That is part of who they are. And that's a bad thing, because what I'm going to try to do as a therapist is create a wedge between them, between this person, and that belief. Because I want them to see that belief as foreign and wrong. So you might work with somebody who says, I'm a worthless piece of crap, I'm a terrible person, for a long time, because self-esteem is tough. It can be really hard to work with. Maybe 6 months down the road, the person comes into therapy and says, I'm really hard on myself. I tell myself, I'm very critical of myself. Well, that is enormous success, because now what you've done is you've made those beliefs ego-dystonic. They are separate from the person. The person realizes that there's something wrong with it and that they're doing it to themselves. I hope that makes some sense. So typically for therapy, we need for something to be ego-dystonic. It needs to be a problem. If it's not a problem for the person, then they're not going to come for treatment. An alcoholic who's drinking, they don't come to treatment because of how much they're drinking. They come to treatment because they realize that they have a problem. Doesn't matter how much they're drinking. So somebody shows up for treatment because they recognize that they have alcoholism. And somebody might drink themselves to death, might drink a lot more than this person, but they're fine. I'm fine, I don't have a problem. That's ego-syntonic, and that's the issue. Once it's ego-dystonic, we can look at it. It's foreign to the person, they don't want it, they don't like it, and it's making them uncomfortable. And that is associated with better insight. Better insight says, I know that this is a problem. So I hope that helps, and I hope that clarifies a little bit about insight and OCD and insight. And I am going to end the video.